Okay, we'd like to turn to the book of Exodus, chapter 14. Exodus 14. We'll read verses 13 through verse 3 of chapter 3, or chapter 15. And Israel saw that great work which the Lord did upon the Egyptians. And the people feared the Lord and believed the Lord and his servant Moses. Then sang Moses unto the children of Israel this song unto the Lord, and spake, saying, I will sing unto the Lord, for he hath triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider hath he thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and song. He is become my salvation. He is my God, and I will prepare him an habitation, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. And then in verse 22 of chapter 15, and we'll read through verse 4 of chapter 16. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, What shall we drink? And he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made sweet. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance, and there he proved them, and said, If thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and will do that which is right in his sight, and will give ear to his commandments, and will keep all his statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 wells of water, and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the waters. And they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the 2nd month after departing out of the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the children of Israel said unto them, Would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, and when we did eat bread to the full. For ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. Then said the Lord unto Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a certain rate every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or no. And then in chapter 17, read the first 3 verses. And all the congregation of the children of Israel journeyed from the wilderness of Sin after their journeys, according to the commandment of the Lord, and pitched in Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. Wherefore the people did chide with Moses, and said, Give us water that we may drink. And Moses said unto them, Why chide ye with me? Wherefore do ye tempt the Lord? And the people thirsted there for water, and the people murmured against Moses, and said, Wherefore is this that thou hast brought us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and cattle with thirst? Israel, throughout Scripture, serves as a type of God's people. And perhaps more so in the book of Exodus than any other place. In the verses that we've just read, we see Israel in a wide range of events, a wide range of circumstances and experiences. From chapter 16 and verse 1, we see that all of this is in about a month's time. And from chapter 14, verse 31 through verse 21 of chapter 15, we see Israel in a place of bliss. And then from there we see them in verse 22 in a place of no water. And then a place of bareness. And from there in verse 23, they're in a place of bitterness. And from there, verse 27, they are in a place of bliss. And from there in chapter 16, a place of bareness and a place of bliss. And from in chapter 17, they're in a place of lack. And again, the Lord brings them from there to a place of bliss. So one of the failures, one of the spiritual failures of Israel was that they did not carry over their experience of bliss into their experiences of barrenness and bitterness. And this is a prevailing problem amongst Israel, and it is a prevailing problem amongst God's people today. Israel had a propensity to become their surroundings. God's people haven't changed. We also have that same problem. They were very much governed by their circumstances, and they failed to learn from their circumstances. They failed to learn from their experiences. So our subject this morning is the failure to carry over the blessings of God. And again, our text verses record some events that occurred in the journey of Israel that exemplify the fact that Israel repeatedly, and just do this once or twice, but they repeatedly failed to carry over the blessings of God into the trials of life. That is a common failure. And you can add to that, we are very good at carrying over the trials of life into the blessings of God. And so we see this in the children of Israel. So, first thing we see is the bliss of the salvation experience. That's something we should never get over. No circumstance should ever drown that out. The book of Exodus opens with the children of Israel in Egyptian bondage, which of course is a type of spiritual bondage and oppression of the unsaved sinner. God raises up a deliverer in Moses. In Exodus chapter 12, you have the blood of the Passover lamb that was slain for God's people. In Exodus 14, God, through Moses, miraculously brings Israel to the banks of the Red Sea. Pharaoh's army is in pursuit. Moses, by the almighty power of God, stretches forth his rod. God rolls back the waters. Israel crosses over on dry ground. When the last Israelite crossed over, Moses again stretches forth his rod. God lets go of the waters that he had rolled back, and Pharaoh and his armies were swallowed up. That was victory. For Israel to escape the land of Egypt was a miracle of God. And again, this is a type. This is a shadow. It's an outline of the salvation of a soul. You and I that have been saved have experienced something greater than the type. What the type typifies always is greater than the type. So we've experienced something greater than the Red Sea in the salvation of our soul. We have been liberated, rescued from a bondage far, far worse than Egyptian bondage. We have been loosed from a power and a grip far greater than the grip of Pharaoh, far more fierce than the grip of Pharaoh. Now, following the miraculous Exodus, notice in our text in Exodus 14:31, the people feared the Lord. That is, they had a reverence for God, and they believed the Lord. Their faith was strong, and his servant Moses. So they feared the Lord. They had a reverence for the Lord. They had a reverence for Moses. They believed the Lord, and they believed Moses. Then in chapter 15, there's a scene of euphoria. These Israelites who had been delivered and redeemed, their hearts are bursting forth with awe, with thankfulness, with passion, with desire to glorify and honor and exalt God. And they break forth with song to God. You see this, they exalt, all through Exodus 15, they're exalting the Lord. We'll not take the time to look at that, but you can do that. So here's a people who have personally experienced, personally witnessed the miraculous power of God. As a result, they are completely absorbed with the one who had just redeemed them. And then we read in verse 22, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. The Red Sea route is continued in the wilderness. And so it is with salvation. The wilderness, of course, is a place of uncertainty, an unsettled place. God just brought them from such a place. It's a place of many traps, many pitfalls, a lot of complications, a lot of stumbling blocks, a place of many obstacles. It can be a place of dilemma. It can be a place of trouble, a place of distress, a place of many difficulties, many annoyances, a place of strain and disturbance. And so it is with our life. This world is a place of annoyance. There are many things that annoy us in this world. And they went out into the wilderness, place of suffering, place of anguish, place of heartache, and pain, and affliction. So the wilderness does not change what happened at the Red Sea. The wilderness of Shur did not change a thing about their experience at the Red Sea. These are a people gloriously and miraculously delivered, emancipated, redeemed by God. And they are, by the grace and mercy of God, the very people of God. And no circumstance, no wilderness changes that. But though they were the people of God, by the miracle of God, that did not exempt them from a journey in the wilderness. And so it is with you and I. So God has now placed them in this wilderness of Shur. They have just experienced, they have just witnessed God roll back an impassable obstacle. They've just witnessed God doing the impossible. No wilderness changes that. No circumstance undoes that. They've just witnessed God defeat their enemy. And no circumstance changes that fact. Nothing undoes that. They had just witnessed and experienced God bury their past. And no wilderness experience changes that fact. And now everything about them should be viewed in light of what happened at the Red Sea. So it is with us. Our life should now be viewed in what happened the day the Lord saved our soul. We should never get past that. So here is a people now, because of God, who have a new position in life, and they have a new life. And so it is with you and I. And now they are physically in a wilderness, but they need to carry with them what they experienced at the Red Sea. The experience of a miraculous salvation. They need to carry with them the reality of their redemption. How often do we carry with us the reality of our redemption? They need to carry with them Exodus 14:31. They feared the Lord and they believed. They need to carry that with them everywhere they go. You go back to the day the Lord saved your soul, there was a reverence for God and you believed. And you need to carry that with you everywhere you go. But do you? Do we? No, we don't. Because we're just like the Israelites. They need to carry with them that awe that they felt at the Red Sea. They need to carry with them that reverence they felt, the thankfulness that they felt, the passion and the desire that overflowed their hearts in Exodus chapter 15. Do not allow the wilderness to swallow your salvation experience. Then we see, so you go from the salvation experience to the bareness and bitterness of the wilderness. We read in verse 22 of Exodus 15, they went 3 days in the wilderness. 3 days. That is 3 days from the Red Sea experience. For 3 days, they've been walking in the sand. They're tired. It's becoming more and more difficult to pick up their feet. And we read, and found no water. For 3 days, they found no water. In other words, they were looking for it. They were in search of it, but they found no water. Now they needed water. They needed water individually. They needed water for their animals. And they're in a desperate search of water. But we read they found no water. They could look in one direction and then another direction and then another direction, but no sign of water. They found no water. They've been delivered. They've been emancipated. They've been redeemed. They are the very people of God. Nothing changes that. They found no water. So they're in peril. You have to have water. And I imagine in my own mind that as they journey in that sand with no water, their walk would eventually turn to staggering and stumbling. And after 3 days, I believe they see something off in the distance. The sun is glistening in the distance on a pool of water. And I imagine in my own mind that someone says, "There's water up ahead." And their strength is revived. The pace picks up. They've got a new energy. And they're all thinking there's relief up ahead. I'm so thirsty, but just up ahead is relief. There's water. They're weary, they're parched, they're in desperate need. And I'm sure that some of them began to think how good that water was going to taste, how good that water was going to feel. And the anticipation is building. And they arrive at the place of water. And I'm sure that some rushed ahead and got there before others, and they dropped to their knees and began to lap up that water and immediately spit it out. Couldn't even swallow it. The reason? The water was bitter, which means the water was poisonous. Their hopes have evaporated. Their hopes have been dashed. And now a disappointment rolls over them. Now there's frustration. There's frustration. And there they are, in a barren and desolate place. Tired, thirsty, a people in desperate need, and there's water right there. It's right there. But it's undrinkable. It's undrinkable. Remember, 3 days ago, the very same people were standing victoriously on the shore of the Red Sea. Oh, how quickly things can change. Being gloriously and miraculously delivered and redeemed, being the very people of God, did not exempt them from this place called Mara. Life does not always bypass Mara. If you live long enough, most of us have, you're going to have many Maras. Life does not bypass Mara. And we read in verse 24, and the people, same people that were singing in Exodus 15 earlier, murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" Here we are. We've gone 3 days without water. Here is water, but it's poison. Moses, what are we going to drink? And they say that in an accusatory tone. 3 days between euphoria and murmuring. It usually doesn't take that long. 3 days is a long time. You try going 3 days without murmuring. It usually doesn't take that long. 3 minutes, maybe. from euphoria and murmuring. And the people murmured against Moses. What's happened? Well, they've lost their perspective of God's redemption of them. They've lost the perspective of what God had just done for them. They failed to carry over with them into Mara what God had done for them. They failed to carry over Exodus 14:31, where they reverenced God and believed the Lord. The very same people who 3 days ago were singing, "The Lord is my strength and song. He has become my salvation. Who is like unto thee, O Lord, among the gods? Who is like unto thee, glorious in holiness, fearful in praise, doing wonders?" And now they're asking, "Moses, what are we going to drink?" They're saying, "Moses, what are we going to do now? Where are we going to find satisfaction? Who's going to show us any good now, Moses?" Those questions, by the way, were answered 3 days ago when God brought them across the Red Sea. There's their answer. But they've lost sight of that. And they've allowed their current circumstances to drown that memory of God's blessing. 3 days ago, same people were standing on the banks of the Red Sea, filled with joy unspeakable, filled with zeal for God, praising God, and now they're grumbling at the man of God, and they're unhappy with God. Don't say that you never get to that place. Oh, we do. Where you're unhappy with God. If you're unhappy with circumstances, you're unhappy with God. Oh, how quickly the spiritual mood can change. Again, it doesn't take 3 days for it to change usually. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" There they are. Disappointment, frustration, distress, annoyance, fear, pessimism, and grief has flooded into their souls. Why? Because they didn't carry over the blessings of the Red Sea into Mara. Their faith has evaporated. It's gone. And the people murmured against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" What they're saying is, "Moses, we hoped to quench our thirst here. But we can't drink this water. What are we going to drink?" Again, that question was answered 3 days ago. God is the answer. Oh, the disaster of forgetting God's marvels in our lives. Imagine the difference had they carried with them to Mara their experience of redemption. Imagine the difference had they carried with them to Mara. Exodus 14:31, they feared God and believed. They would have come to Mara with an entirely different attitude. They would have come and they would have said, "Moses, we hope to quench our thirst here, but we can't drink this water. But that's okay, because the God who dried up the sea, He can certainly provide us water." That would have been the response had they carried it over. But they didn't. Had they carried with them to Mara their redemption experience, They would have come to Marah with the attitude, we hope to quench our thirst here. But we cannot drink this water. But the God who just 3 days ago made a path through the midst of the deep waters, He can certainly make a path for us to find pure water. But that wasn't their attitude, because they failed to carry it over. And now we see them governed and controlled by Marah. And any time you and I are governed and controlled by our circumstance, our predicaments in life, it's because we have failed to carry over the blessings of God. So here they are. Because of this failure, they're disappointed, they're frustrated, distressed, they're angry, they're filled with fear and pessimism, and grief is flooding their souls. They've gotten over the bliss that God gave them just 3 days ago. It's like 3 days ago never happened. It's like it never happened. And how many of God's people live life as if salvation never happened? It's like seeing ourselves in a mirror as you read these accounts. When God miraculously brought them through the Red Sea, they had a new position. They had a new life. But they failed to carry it to Marah, the bliss of what God had done for them. And now they're under the control of their situation. Then notice the bliss of the wilderness. While Israel was murmuring, verse 24, we read in verse 25 that Moses cried unto the Lord. I believe he carried it over, and he cried unto the Lord. When you carry over the blessings of God, the miracles of God, when you come tomorrow, what are you going to do? You're going to turn to God. You're going to immediately turn to God. That's your first response, because you've carried it over. But when you don't carry it over, your first response is to murmur and to complain. Moses cried unto the Lord. He remembered. He remembered that it was God who brought us across the Red Sea. And he carries that Red Sea experience into Marah. He cries unto the Lord. And in response, it says, the Lord showed him, Moses, a tree. The Lord will show you a lot of things if you cry unto him. And the Lord showed him. God, no doubt, instructed Moses to cut down that tree and to cast it into the water. And notice what it says. Which when he, Moses, had cast into the waters, those bitter waters, those poisonous waters, the waters were made sweet. When God provided, with that God provided and revealed tree, when that tree came into contact with the water, the tree soaked up the bitterness and dispensed the sweetness. The Lord does that, still does. And a miraculous transformation took place. That God provided and revealed tree had an influence, had an impact upon the bitter waters. And the people are again brought into a state of bliss. And then notice verse 27 of Exodus 15, and they came to Elim, where there was, so they were able to drink at Marah. And then they came to Elim, and there were 12 wells of water, plenty of water. 70 palm trees, places of refreshment, shade, rest. And they encamped there by the waters. So there they are. They're once again brought into a state of bliss. Plenty of water, plenty of shade, plenty of refreshment from God. No doubt, their morale has been restored. No doubt their attitude has changed. They're in a state of bliss. But then, they have to leave there. They have to leave there. Exodus 16, verse 1, and they took their journey from Elim, and all the congregation of the children of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month, after their departing out of the land of Egypt. So they've now journeyed from Elim and are now between Elim and Sinai in a place called the wilderness of Sin. And now it's been about 30 days since they had been miraculously redeemed from Egypt, miraculously redeemed from the cruel rule of Pharaoh and his taskmasters. And here are the redeemed of the Lord. They have seen God's miraculous wonders at the Red Sea. They have seen God's miraculous wonders at Marah. And they have experienced the bliss of Elim. And they're led by God into the wilderness. And once again, their resources are depleted. Verse 2, and the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured. And listen to them in verse 3. And the children of Israel said unto them, would to God we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt. That's like saying, would to God we died before the Lord saved us. When we sat by the flesh pots. Now they're reviewing it, they're changing history. When we sat by the flesh pots and when we did eat bread to the full. Oh, we had it so good in Egypt. They've revised history. For ye have brought us forth, speaking to Moses and Aaron, ye have brought us forth into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly. Now we know why you've brought us here. You've brought us here to kill us. They've turned into fools. They have forgotten. They have forgotten what God has done for them. So here's a people who have experienced the miraculous ways of God in their lives. At the Red Sea and at Marah, they were shown the almighty presence of God. At the Red Sea and Marah, they were shown that God can. God can do the impossible. At the Red Sea and Marah, they were shown that God cares. At the Red Sea and Marah, they were shown the faithfulness of God. At the Red Sea and Marah, they were shown the sufficiency of God. At the Red Sea and Marah, they were shown that God is our resource. At the Red Sea and Marah, they experienced the miraculous provision of God. At the Red Sea and Marah, they were shown their dependence upon God. And they were shown that glorious possibilities exist in impossible situations. But there was a failure. to carry these wondrous truths into the wilderness of sin. And as a result, they're trying to figure things out. You carry with you God's miraculous blessings in your life, and this truth will stay with you. I don't have to figure it out. God already has it under control. There are God's people, that's all they do is try to figure it out. And the reason is they failed to carry over the miraculous. Did the children of Israel figure out how to get across the Red Sea? No, God already had it. Did they figure out how to drink of the waters at Marah? No, God already was going to take care of it. You and I don't have to figure it out. The figures are those who have forgotten. They fail to carry over. And listen to them. There in verse 3. Oh, we had it so good in Egypt. They're saying to Moses and Aaron, your deliverance of us has put us in a place where we cannot survive. We can't survive. They have forgotten their experience of God's ability to take care of them and provide for them. You and I are the same way. We can have a great need today and God miraculously provide it. Tomorrow, a different need arises. Oh, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? We've already forgotten. In less than 24 hours, we've already forgotten. And then get half mad at someone who reminds us. Well, just remember what God did yesterday. Oh, you're undermining my trials. No, they're just trying to remind you, bring you back. We're just like them. Except again, it doesn't take us 3 days. It doesn't take us 30 days. They have forgotten their experience of the wisdom and the power and the goodness and the love and the faithfulness of God toward them. And again, it's just like the Red Sea never happened. Marah never happened. Elam never happened. They have forgotten. God help us. And now they're filled with anger and exasperation and saying, why have you brought us out here to die? You've brought us out here to die. God had brought them out with a mighty hand. And now, you hear them, and here's what they're saying. Oh, that God would let us go back into Egypt. We had it pretty good in Egypt. After all, we had a weekly allowance in Egypt. You couldn't survive on it, but you had a weekly allowance. We didn't have to live by faith in Egypt. Didn't have to trust in God in Egypt. Oh, that we could just go back there. Their hearts and minds are back in Egypt. And therefore they cannot handle adverse circumstances in their life. Their attitude and their heart is far from God. They're actually missing Egypt. When you begin to miss your unsaved life, you're in sad, sad shape. You're a long ways from God. So there they are now under the control of their circumstances. Verse 4, Exodus 16, then said the Lord unto Moses, behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you. He says, I will for you the mercy and the grace of God. And then in verses 11 and 12, And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, I've heard the murmurings of the children of Israel. Yes, He hears every one of them. He hears the ones you don't utter and the ones you just think also. Speak unto them, saying, At evening ye shall eat flesh, and in the morning ye shall be filled with bread, and ye shall know that I am the Lord your God. They should have already known that. And had they carried the blessings over, they would have known that. Once again, Israel is brought to a place of bliss. And then in Exodus 17, they come to Rephidim. And we read, there was no water for the people to drink. We had this experience 30 days ago. And God provided water. God took the bitterness out and put the sweetness in, and we were able to drink. We've been here before. Let's just cry out unto God. Oh, no. They failed to carry that over. And what did they do? And the people murmured. And the people murmured. Again, it's just like the past experience has never happened. Once again, they're under the governing power and control of circumstances. In verse 17 of Exodus 17, they even ask, is the Lord among us or not? It's amazing. God's long-suffering is amazing. Not only with Israel, but with us. His long-suffering is just amazing. You and I would not put up with this. So looking at this event, these events, we see a frightening cycle, and one that too often mirrors ourselves. And the sad truth is, we fail to carry our miraculous experiences of God into our places of trial. We would have an entirely different perspective of trial if we just carried over our miraculous experiences of God. And the result is this: we find ourselves controlled and paralyzed by trying circumstances. Well, I won't be in church today. Something awful's happened. My toe was swelled. And on it goes, because of a failure to carry over the blessings of God. Life does not bypass the places of dilemma. Life does not bypass places of trouble and distress and difficulty. Oh, sometimes it does. But you're not going to get through life bypassing these things on a continuous basis. Life doesn't always bypass suffering and heartache. Life doesn't always bypass annoyance and strain, pain, and affliction. But you and I do not have to be under the paralyzing control of those things. All we need to do is carry over what God has done here to here. Carry it over. And stop carrying over. God blesses you abundantly today. But you had a bad day yesterday. Well, I'm going to drag that into today. They're constantly down because they're constantly dragging what they perceive as bad into the good, and they absolutely refuse to take the good into the bad. So they're always down. They always are. It's a spiritual problem. A problem that we need to be delivered from. And that God would help us to carry over the blessings of the Lord into the trials of life. Brother Ben, if you come and lead us in a verse of song.